Hello and welcome to this year's Yom HaShoah commemoration from the Florida Holocaust Museum. I'm Lois Pardal and I'm president of the Board of Trustees. I'd like to welcome all of you here and welcome you. And as I look out tonight and I see all of the Holocaust survivors and second generation, it just makes me feel that you are the mitzvahs for those that do not have any. And I'm so honored to be in your presence. Tonight, our chairs of tonight's Yom HaShoah event are Rabbi Daniel Uppen and Nancy Baumstein, and I sincerely thank them and their committee for putting together this commemoration. We have a short message from Senator Bill Nelson.
Thank you for allowing me to participate in this special day, Yom HaShoah, the Holocaust Remembrance Day. We should never forget that was when that murderous Nazi regime started the extermination of over 6 million Jews, 1.5 million of which were children, where they pitted the community against each other, neighbor against neighbor, and went about with brutal efficiency the systematic extermination. It's the obligation of all of us to never forget. And of course, we see today a similar kind of situation in Darfur, where one regime is intent on exterminating a people. Again, it's time for us to say, never again. We shall not forget. And so thank you for letting me participate with you on this special day as we remember the brutal lessons of the past and we try to avoid those mistakes now and in the future. Thank you.
I now would like to call Rabbi Daniel Uppen and Nancy Baumstein.
I'm Nancy Baumstein. It's Rabbi Uppen. We feel very privileged and honored to have been asked to put together this evening's program. So thank you for being here with us to commemorate and reflect on something that is so special as Yom HaShoah. We'd like to thank the museum staff that helped us along the way, Ulla Stepinska, Noreen Brand, and our CEO, David Schaefer. Without them, we couldn't have really done what we've done. So thank you so much.
This time I'd like to also call up Hal Hillman, who will help me with the words of this psalm, Psalm 121. Shir lamalot, esayna el harim, me'ayin yavo Ezri me'im Adonai, oseh shamayim va'aretz, al yiten lamut raglecha, al yanum shomrecha, hinei lo yanum velo ishan shomer Yisrael, Adonai shomrecha, Adonai tzilcha, al yad yeminecha. Yomam hashemesh lo yakeka ve'areach balayla, Adonai yishmorecha mikol ra, yishmor et nafshecha. Adonai yishmor tzetcha uvoecha, me'ata v'ad olam.
Thank you. A song for accents. I turn my eyes to the mountains. From where will my help come? My help comes from Adonai, maker of heaven and earth. Adonai will not let your foot give way. Your guardian will not slumber. Your guardian is Israel. Adonai is your protection. A guardian is your right hand. By day, the sun will not strike you, nor the moon by night. Adonai will guard you from all harm and guard you for life. Adonai guards your going and coming now and forever.
Amen. Thank you, Hal. At this point, we're going to light 6 candles in memory of the 6 million who perished. I'd like to invite up Liesel Schick, Jerry Rowicki, Herda Pila, Jeanette Bornstein, Marie Silverman, Sigi Borax, Betty Grebinjagov.
Enosh kechatzi yama, ketzita sadek el yatzit, kiruach avraba, veinenu yakirenu, od mekama, v'chesed Adonai, me'olam ve'ad olam, al yireah, v'tzidkato livnei banim, v'tzidkato livnei banim, v'tzidkato, v'tzidkato, livnei banim. Enosh kechatzi yama, ketzita sadek el yatzit, kiruach avraba, v'einenu v'lo yakirenu, od mekama, ve'lo yakirenu.
Would everyone please rise as Cantor Deborah Jacobson leads us in the words of the El Malay Rachamim.
El Malay Rachamim שוכן במרומים המצא מנוחה נכונה תחת כנפי השכינה במעלו קדושים וטהרים כזוהר הרקיע מזהירים לנשמות 6,000,000 אחינו ואחיותינו שמתו על קידוש השם ינוחו בשלווה ובשלום שלא ידעו בחייהם בעל הרחמים הסתירהו בסתר כנפיך לעולמים וצרו בצרו החיים את נשמתם אדוני הוא נחלתם וינוחו בשלום על משכבם ונאמר
Please remain standing and read with me. Exalted, compassionate God, grant perfect peace in your sheltering presence among the holy and pure, to the souls of all our brethren, men, women, and children of the house of Israel, who were slaughtered and burned. May their memory endure, inspiring truth and loyalty in our lives. May their souls thus be bound up in the bond of life, and may they rest in peace. And let us say, Amen. Yitkadal v'yitkadash me rabah, ve'alma divra chirutei v'yamlich malchutei, v'chayechon uvyomechon uv'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael, ba'agala uv'zman kariv v'imru. Amen. Yehi shmei rabba mevorach l'olam omei omaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh v'yithadar v'yitaleh v'yithalal shmei dekudsha brichu. Le'elam kol birchata v'shirata tush b'chata v'nechamata ta'amiran be'alma v'imru. Amen. Yehi shlama rabba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru. Amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru. Amen. Please be seated. This time I'd like to call up Mrs. Johanna Bromberg, who will introduce our featured speakers tonight.
Marie Silverman and her sister Jeanette Bornstein are survivors of the Holocaust, who will share their stories with us this evening, as they have been enlightening students. In the case of Marie, here for the past 9 years, and in the case of Jeanette, first in Providence, Rhode Island, and now in her new home here for the past 4 or 5 years. Some of you no doubt have heard the phrase, Chazak ve'ematz, be strong and courageous. This was the encouragement, or the blessing, given to Joshua millennia ago as the Israelites prepared to cross the Jordan River into Canaan after their 40-year trek. Today, Chazak ve'ematz, be strong and courageous, is used also as a farewell greeting in Israel, particularly among the Scouts. We'll hear in a few moments of the painful and yet courageous decision which Rose Berkovic, the mother of Jeanette and Marie, made in the hope of saving the lives of her children. We'll learn of their physically, mentally, and spiritually challenging treks and odysseys through meadows and forests, over mountains, and across oceans. If you, like the vast majority of United States citizens, are hesitant or inhibited public speakers, you'll understand the Chazak ve'ematz, the courage and strength that has been required for Marie and Jeanette to, first of all, decide to tell their stories, and then to re-evoke their painful emotions and remembrances as they prepare their presentations, and each time that they deliver them. Not even to mention their original hesitation at public speaking. Marie was encouraged by her beloved husband, Mel, Zichrona Livracha, to continue at this Holocaust Museum what she had begun in the classroom. Jeanette was invited by her rabbi in Providence to speak at a Yom HaShoah observance, and then moved into the Providence Holocaust Center. Chazak, chazak, v'nitchazek. Be strong, and let us strengthen one another. You may be familiar with this phrase as the response of the congregation whenever we complete the reading of one of the books of the Torah, and certainly on Simchat Torah when we complete Deuteronomy. At those moments, we rise together and encourage each other to take strength from what we have just learned, and to use that strength and courage to continue our tasks of learning and doing. So too, may we be strengthened in our resolves to zachor, to remember, v'la'asot, and to do, for that's why we're here tonight, as we take strength and courage from Marie and Jeanette. Chazak, chazak, v'nitchazek. I'm honored to present Marie Silverman and Jeanette Bornstein.
We are the surviving victims of the Holocaust. During World War II, we were in camp, we were in hiding places, and on the run to escape the Nazis. And in our earliest years, we lost the right to be alive. As survivors, we have joined together to help you understand and share the effects of our experience and celebrate our existence. We bequeath to you our legacy of suffering pain, dehumanization, and the loss of our loved ones, in the hope that from this a light of hope, peace, tolerance, and understanding will emerge.
When the Germans invaded Belgium, we were among thousands to flee and seek refuge in France. We were packed in a train like cattle, and I remember hearing the continuous noise of the bombs. I asked my father with tears in my voice, "Where are we going?" He told me that we can't live in our house anymore. And when I asked why, he said, "Because we are Jewish." I didn't understand. I was confused. I was scared. I was 6 years old. When we arrived in France, we were hidden in the home of a Gentile family, one of many such families who risked their life by hiding Jews in cellars, attics, and barns of their home. But it wasn't long before the Gestapo were making house searches and rounding up all the Jews that they could find. We were captured. My mother, my sister, and I were piled in an open truck and transported to an internment camp, a German prison camp. My father was separated from us and sent elsewhere. His whereabouts were not known to us. The three of us went to Camp Rivesaltes in Perpignan, the southern part of France. Rivesaltes was a real hell. It was like an overcrowded stable, crawling with lice, cockroaches, and mice. We slept on the ground, which was covered with a little bit of hay. We couldn't stretch our arms or legs without touching another body. We were cold and always hungry. We were given one meal a day, which consisted of a bowl of soup and a piece of bread. Camp Rivesaltes was home for 9 months. News from the outside trickled in the camp through the underground network. My mother learned that partisan couriers, those are men who were engaged to fight the Nazis, were able to reach our camp and smuggle children to a safe place. So in the middle of one night, my sister and I were awakened, and without any explanation, my mother took us to a designated meeting place and handed us over to the couriers. We didn't know where we were going, and we were terrified. We didn't know these men. We were taken to a place that originally was a Catholic school, converted to a hiding place for Jewish children. We were in Vence, France. We don't know how, but miraculously, our parents found each other's location and both managed to escape and flee to Nice. The odds of surviving such an attempt was nearly non-existent. Theirs was a fortunate exception. We can only surmise their desperation to see us, perhaps for the last time, was so strong that they were willing to risk death. We were reunited in Vence. Our father was beyond recognition. He looked like a living skeleton, and he died shortly after our reunion. cause of his death was the result of the cruel atrocities that he endured in the camp. It was decided that he be buried in a Gentile cemetery in order not to arouse suspicion that there was a Jewish refuge nearby. After my father died, my mother remained in Vance and worked in the children's home. The safety we felt in Nice was short-lived. We could not foresee the danger that lay ahead. The Nazis were on our backs, and we needed another hiding place. Again, with the help of the underground, we were relocated to Creuse, a small town in the mountains of France. In Creuse, we were taken to a castle that had been given to Jews on the run. We hid there until warning came that the Nazis were nearby and their mission was to send every Jew to a concentration camp in Germany. We had an aunt and uncle who had previously escaped to Spain. They hired and paid for 2 couriers to find us. And if successful, they would smuggle my sister and I out of France and hopefully to Spain. Again, my mother was faced with the agony of having to send us away. This time she told us about the journey we were about to take, where we would be going, and why we had to go. Despite our cries, our pleas, and our promises to be good, she handed us to these strange men who led us away. She watched us leave, knowing that she had no alternative. It was a matter of our survival. We took the train to the foot of the Pyrenees. From there, we crossed the mountain by foot. It was snowing and bitter cold. We walked during the night and hid during the day. We had to walk single file and were sternly warned not to utter a sound. The Nazis were all around us. We could hear their gunshots, and the slightest noise would attract them to us, and we would be victims of those guns. One night, I was so tired, so scared, so cold, I cried. I cried because I wanted to hold my sister's hand. Within seconds, my mouth was taped shut to keep me silent. I was silent the rest of the journey. I don't know how long we walked until we reached the border of Spain. From there, we took a train to Barcelona, where we were met by our aunt and uncle, who were strangers to me. We lived with them in Spain for 6 months while waiting for our visas to Canada. However, bureaucratic regulations would not allow my sister and I visas to Canada because we were not registered as their children. We were wards of the United States Committee for the Care of European Children, and our visas were for America. So once again, we were separated from what had become familiar to us. Our first stop in this country was Philadelphia. We were greeted by the committee, who escorted us to Newark, New Jersey, where we were placed in an orphanage until a foster home could be found for us. It was April 1944 when we arrived in Providence. My sister and I lived in the same foster home until the end of that summer. And then, for the first time in our life, we were separated. We were each placed with different families. Communicating was not easy. We didn't speak a word of English when we arrived in this country. But for me, at the age of 10, I wanted to be like every other kid, and certainly did not want to be identified as a refugee. I never talked about my past, never acknowledged it, and in my quiet shame, I denied it. It was many years before I could understand that my denial provided me the means to forget the painful experience of my early childhood. While we were adjusting to life in America, the Red Cross with Jewish organizations was searching for my mother. It took over a year to discover that she was alive and to locate her. After the war, my mother went back to Nice and reburied my father in a Jewish cemetery. It took another 5 years before she was able to get a visa and proper papers to come to the United States. Seeing my mother for the first time in 5 years was a shock. She looked haunted and sickly, and we thought, this can't be my mother. I looked at her with the eyes of the 6-year-old child that she had abandoned. I was resentful, and I couldn't forgive her. I had to leave the comfort of my foster home and rebuild a relationship with my mother. And with time, the events of my childhood surfaced. I was compelled to retrieve the events of my early years in order for my own life to have meaning. I didn't know then, we couldn't have known, what was in my mother's tortured mind. But today, we know that our feelings of abandonment was the bravery, the courage, the self-denial, and the love my mother had to save us. I speak to you about the evils of the Holocaust. My sister and I are credible witnesses.
Most of us who survive owe our lives to someone. Someone who refused to tolerate the injustice. Someone who would not and could not agree that death was our destiny. The generation of Holocaust survivors is disappearing. Who will stand up to protect the memory of the Holocaust? The answer must be all of you, Jews, non-Jews alike, and particularly our children and grandchildren. You must keep the memory alive.
In the ghettos and in the camps, there was no such thing as normal life. Where once a thriving Jewish culture had celebrated life, its remnants during the Shoah struggled simply to remain alive. One needed to do whatever one could, simply to live another day. Funderarbeit, or slave labor, describes a scene at the entrance to the ghetto where Jews face the corrupt guards who routinely steal from them, yet are not above being bribed or otherwise manipulated for more preferential treatment. This was the new reality for Jews who, ironically, could buy a few days more survival by taking food from their families' mouths and offering it to their captors. The song, which comes from the Kovno ghetto, creates a sense of sarcastic irony by borrowing phrases from another of other popular Yiddish songs. But this irony is brought home most dramatically by the choice of melody. Borrowing the tune of the well-known Eufen Prepacek, the songwriter turns the original version's warm, tender scene of a Rebbe lovingly teaching his students completely upside down, seeming to say, that was then, this is now. Life is not, nor will it ever be, the same. Translations of these songs are in your programs. Beim Ghetto Teurel brennt a Feierel, de Kontroll is groß, es gehen jedelach von de Brigadelach, von jeden gießt sich Schweiß, es gehen jedelach von de Brigadelach, von jeden gießt sich Schweiß. Sie soll ich weitergehen, sie soll ich bleiben stehen, ich weiß nicht wem und wo. Der Kommandantele in grüner Mantele, nimmt doch alles zu. Der Kommandantele in grüner Mantele, nimmt doch alles zu. Holzer Steitele, Geld von Beitele, steht und nimmt Milch von Fendele und Supp von Kendele. Jedelech se brennt. Milch von Fendele und Supp von Kendele, jedelech se brennt. Ach, Haver Mittenstreif, ich bin in ganzen Treif, helf mir beim Kontroll. Ich geb dir auf dem Zweck als Ding heint weg und morgen noch einmal. Ich geb dir auf dem Zweck als Ding heint weg und morgen noch einmal. Stellt sich heus zu vier, du steh leben mir, krieg doch nicht voraus, geh zum rechten Goi, schittas jantwarkoi, siehst do Labenbräut, geh zum rechten Goi, schittas jantwarkoi, siehst do Labenbräut.
Varsha. This piece was written on the first anniversary of the first uprising in Warsaw Ghetto, the 18th of January, 1944, in the Norwich Forest. Translations can be found in your program as well. Es verschwindet nicht die Nacht und der Tag kommt nicht an. A blutige Keule wird die Erde schein. A jede flattert auf wie a stürmischer Fahn. Von ihm Tal, von dem Sim, ein je flattert auf wie a stürmischer Fahn, von ihm Tal, von dem Sim. In Chor ist das Ghetto, die Jeden in Schlacht. Der Jid spricht durch Ruhig und durch Flamme. Nie komme, stürmt die Nacht, vor Kinder, vor Tates, vor Mames. Nie komme, stürmt die Nacht, vor Kinder, vor Tates, vor Mames. Der Schnee schied und der Erd wird nicht weiß. Es halt noch das Blut in ein Siedel. Es ruft noch nie komme, auf schneeigen Eis, das Blut von die heidische Jiden. Es ruft noch nie komme, auf schneeigen Eis, das Blut von die heidische Jiden. Kein Tag wird nicht sein, ruft der Jed unbenacht. Wir werden die Welt nicht vergeben, die welche seinen Gefallen in Schlacht ewig in uns verleben. Die welche seinen Gefallen in Schlacht ewig in uns verleben.
I'd like to thank Cantor David Sislin and Cantor Deborah Jacobson and Cantor Sharon Brown Levy for bringing so much meaning and spirit to our program. And to Marie and Jeanette, thank you for telling us your story and opening your hearts. Such hazak, I am in awe of you. And to Johanna, a beautiful and endearing introduction. Thank you. The Monument, translated from Polish by Helena Birnbaum. To heroes, poems, rhapsodies. To heroes, the descendants will pay homage, their names engraved on the plinths, and to them a monument of marble. To valiant soldiers, medals. To soldiers' death, a cross. Bewitch the glory and suffering into steel, granite, and bronze. Legends will remain after the great ones, that they were such enormous. The myth will coagulate and become the monument. But who will tell you, the future generations, not about the bronze or the myth's theme, but that Hay took her, killed her, and that she is no longer? Was she good? Not even so. She often quarreled after all, slammed the door, reprimanded, but she was. Pretty? She was never pretty, even before her hair silvered. Wise? Well, quite ordinary, not stupid, but she was. You see, she was, and now when she is not, every corner looks on with evil eyes, and you can see at once she is not here. Even not for such a big word. Home, my God, was it a true household? They were not from Warsaw. The husband spent whole days in his workshop. The son also had somewhere his own doings. The little room was often not cleaned, for she had to bring water from the downstairs. Yet, in a way, all the implements were at hand. The clock kept smiling. So she was. She was. And what? A human being? No, it's unimportant. No statistics will mention her. For the world, for Europe, she was less than a grain of dust. Big deal, all her efforts. But when you only neared the entrance, before you'd held the door handle, before you'd pushed the door, something smelled in the air, perhaps a warm soup or a white towel. A kind of warmth would have wrapped around you. So she was. And they took her. She left as she stood, from near the kitchen stove. They had no time for the soup. They took her. She went. She is no longer. They have killed her. Her husband will return from the workshop. He will sit heavily on the stool. His hands will drop on his lap. He turns his head all around and looks. No fire under the stove range. The dishcloth fell on the floor. A plate on the table. It's all dirty around. He does not rise. He leans. He thinks. Too bad. She is no longer. He would eat the bread and soup from the workshop food, alien to him and miserable. He eats and looks. On the shelf, a silent, cold, and dead, her pot. He will not return to the workshop. The son will come back hungry from the city, into the undone bed. He will throw himself with his mud-covered boots on. He will not fall asleep. He will look and will not forget. There, it is mother's cooled-down pot, her monument. Thank you, everyone, for being with us this evening.